Now, knowing where the channel is in the river is important for several reasons. First of all, that's where the speediest water is going to be. So it's going to get you towards St. Charles the fastest. Second of all, the channel is where barges are also going to be. So knowing where the channel is means you can get out of the channel to avoid barges. And we'll hear a little bit more about barges in a second. But third is by staying in the channel, you can avoid wing dikes and the swirly water that's associated with them. Now, the Missouri River used to be about 3 times wider than it is now. Starting back in the 1930s, the Corps of Engineers started to shrink the channel of the river through a process called channelization. So they're basically squeezing the river to make it more narrow, deeper, and to sort of lock it in place. That means that the Missouri River is highly engineered. So once you get used to the patterns of how it flows and where the channel goes, it can be pretty predictable, like where you can find the channel once you're looking at the shape of the river. So this map is showing you just a little chunk from the Army Corps of Engineers navigation charts. You can see that the channel tends to stay on the outside of bends as you're moving downstream. And these little symbols, these stand for the navigation markers that you will see posted on the side of the river. They're going to be posted on the bank of the river. They're often nailed to trees. We'll get to those in a second. Now, each sign will have one symbol on one side and another symbol on the back side. So the solid means that, like this green one here, if you're approaching that sign, the solid, and you're seeing a solid sign, that means the channel is staying on that side of the river up until that sign. And then when you look at the back side of that sign, there will usually be a cross hatched. So in this case, it's green if it's going to be on your right side. And that crosshatch is telling you that your next move is the channel is going to be crossing to the other side. So as you're paddling by in your canoe or kayak, you can look back over your shoulder after you pass a sign and you'll see the backside, and that's going to tell you your next move. So, yeah. So this channel crossing, once you see that crossing marker over your back shoulder, it's a gentle sloping cross to the other side. It's going to cross towards the sign on the opposite bank, which may be hard to see. It may be, it may be a long ways if it's a real long bend, but it's not like, the channel doesn't sort of, take a right degree turn and cross the river. It's going to be a gentle sloping curve. One thing that we like to say is if you think about the river as a 5-lane highway, in general, you're going to want to be in lanes 2, 3, and 4. You don't really necessarily need to be all the way over on the bank unless you're really avoiding, an obstacle or a watercraft or something like that. In general, staying towards the middle, you're pretty good. That's the general good flow in the river. The channel and how it behaves is different if the river's high or if it's low and slow. So these things kind of change depending on whether the wing dikes are visible or they're underwater. But staying in the channel can help you avoid underwater obstacles like dikes and help you get out of the channel if there's a barge approaching. So it's just important to know where that is for that safer and fastest water, to find that safe spot on the river. Anything else about that I missed, you guys?
No.
Look, sounds good to me. We'll talk more about it as we go, I'm sure.
For sure. So this is what a channel marker, also known as a day marker, looks like on the Mississippi River. So over there on the big Mississippi River, each sign has its own post. They usually have lights. They look really nice. They're sturdy and strong. But you get over to the Missouri River, and this might be what you're more likely to see on the Missouri. things are not always taken care of. They're not as high tech as the Mississippi River. So not every day marker is necessarily going to be where it's supposed to be. Some will be overgrown with vines. So you can't necessarily count on them. And that's where using navigational aids like the Pro Paddler app can really help you find that channel in some of those tricky spots where it's difficult to see what's going on. And real quickly, in the beginning of the race becomes kind of like a conga line of boats. So, looking ahead, you can see where other people are going and really start, if you're kind of new to the Missouri River, you start to see, okay, I see what's going on here. I see where I can start crossing and I can see, where to sort of follow things. Now, I do also recommend, I mentioned before, there's really no reason to get right over to the bank, real close to the bank when you're paddling on that channel side. It's really good to leave like a 50 to really even 100 foot between you and the bank. That can avoid some slower water that's associated with the bank, but just giving yourself a little extra space.
All right. Buoys are the physical in-water channel markers, similar to the channel markers that Steve was just talking about. So they're very big, they're metal, and they're pretty substantial. The green ones are called cans, and they're going to mark your starboard right descending channel. So as you're going downstream, which you should be, you should see them on your right-hand side. And then the red nuns, as they're called, those red buoys mark the port left descending channel edge. So they're attached by chains to concrete sinkers. They technically should stay put, but they're not always going to stay put due to being dislodged at times or something. So in general, they indicate the right hand and left hand edges of that channel, and you'll see them throughout your entire race, and they're giving just a dotted line idea of where the edges of the channel should be. And so similar to what Steve was just talking about with the channel markers, by understanding where these buoys are and recognizing that path, you're going to know where the barges have to travel within these spaces. And by understanding that, you'll know where the channel is not and where you can make a good decision in case you need to get out of that channel to avoid a barge or recreational boats, whatever it might be. So don't get close to these. Don't tie up to them. They can swing wildly sometimes, or even be partially submerged and just kind of pop out. So look for little disturbances at the channel's edge. That might be a buoy that you're seeing affecting the water. They do have reflective tape on them, so you can shine your flashlight on them at night and listen for them at night. You can get a feel during the day of how much water passes around these, what they sound like, and then in the dark at night, you'll hear them and be familiar with that sound. And this is a picture of a couple of buoys, which at least one of them is clearly out of place because a barge couldn't actually navigate between these two. So don't take them literally, but get the feel for where they are and just the pattern that you experience with these buoys along the way. And then you'll get the hang of recognizing when they're out of place.
And if I could add too, because we've had really pretty stable low water for quite a while on the river, on the Missouri River this year, there's a lot of buoys out there. So a lot of times when the river comes up and down, it'll dislodge them and move them on downstream. But this year, there's just a lot of them. And it seems like with the lower water too, in order to mark some of the low spots for barges in particular, that there's really like maybe more buoys out this year than I've even seen before. So definitely just be aware of that.
Yep, and give them space as you're going by. Hopefully you're not going to be right up next to them anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Wing dikes are the rock structures that are added to the Missouri River to narrow and deeper the river, or deepen the river, and create and maintain that channel, that barge channel. And they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're almost always found on the opposite side of the channel. So normally during your race, you're not going to have any need to be close to one of these. And you won't have a need to be right up against them at all. So avoid them and know that they extend farther into the water than you're actually probably seeing, and can create some big eddies near them. The Corps of Engineers has put down a lot of extra rock on these structures this year. So pay close attention to those channel markers at night. Listen for these as you might hear some rushing water around the ends of these. And then as Steve was talking about, especially at night, just err on the side of traveling down the middle of the river. So those are ways you can avoid wing dikes during the night also. And they don't show up very well with a flashlight. And some of the older, the rock that's been there longer is brown, and you might even see stuff growing on top of these right now. They're very exposed currently in low water, and you'll really recognize the new rock in places. It's very bright, and you'll see that from a greater distance. And the good news about wing dikes for you all is that they can be a place of a safe haven of sorts. So if you want to duck behind one to avoid barge wake, that's definitely an option. And you can use that area behind them when even you might need to stop and call safety dispatch. So if you need a place to stop and you don't have a ramp nearby or a good bank, maybe you want to duck behind one of these. And in slower, still water behind them, you can use them to your advantage like that if you need to.
And I just wanted to point out too, because it in this picture shows it, the wing dikes are that's the name for the dikes that jut out into the river, often somewhat perpendicular to the current. Another type of dike you'll see a lot of are trailing dikes or revetment dikes that are parallel to the current of the river. So like this large one that you can see kind of in the back of this photo. And so the channel is often runs adjacent to these long revetment dikes. So that's just giving you a name to what you're going to see out there.
All right, let's talk a bit about barge traffic and where all these dikes are built for. There will, every year we probably encounter, 3 or 4 through boats that are actually not just servicing building a dike or servicing a sand dredge, but are actually moving cargo somewhere on the system. So we share the river with them. We have a great partnership with navigation, and they know the rules of the river, and so we just need to make you aware of what their expectation is for kayaks and canoes being out there on the river with them. Most of these guys and gals who work the river have experienced the race before, they've worked the race before, been on the river while it's happening, so they have some familiarity with the event and will certainly be aware that it's going on. I think what they most would want from us is they want you to be aware of where the channel is, where they have to go, and then they want you to behave predictably. I mean, we've all been driving down the road and a squirrel runs in the middle of the road, and then she goes left, she goes right, she goes left, she goes right. She can't decide which way to get out of your way. And that doesn't end well often. So what they want is us to just make the right decision and then demonstrate visually that we have made the right decision. So that means generally like you've made a turn and you're sticking with that turn because it was the right move to make. You also need to assess with each time you encounter a towboat pushing a load of barges, how big is the wake going to be and how am I going to deal with that wake? So there's 2 issues. First issue, how can I get out of the way of this thing and be well out of the way so nobody's nervous? And secondly, what kind of wake are we dealing with? So the towboat on the bottom is pushing. You can tell that those are lightly loaded barges because they are mostly out of the water. So they're not displacing a bunch of water. He's got empties. And so you can hope that that means not a super big wake behind the towboat because he's not having to use as much horsepower to move that. The one at the top of your screen, that looks like some kind of petroleum barges. So there might be asphalt or asphalt oil or something on there. And that's a big boat, and it might have a much bigger wake behind it because of its displacement. If they're going downstream, it's generally less wake. If they're going upstream, it's generally more wake. Also in the bottom photo, you can see we've circled this moment. And this was where somebody was, they left the ramp. This was at Huntsdale. They left the ramp with the initial intention to go around on the far side of this load. It's like, so to the right of your screen, that's where they started heading. Then at the last second, inexplicably, they decided, oh, we better be on the other side. And so they cut like the squirrel back in front of this towboat. And I thought this was going to end super bad. Thankfully, the towboat, he had seen them on his left, and then he saw them turn back in front of him, and you could immediately hear him throttle back and wait, because once they got in front of his load there, he can't see him anymore. If you can't see his windows, he can't see you. And he waited there kind of hovering, hoping, and we were all holding our breath, and they popped out on the other side, his right side. I don't know why they did that. It was a panic thing to do. There was plenty of real estate on their other side to make it. So those are the kind of things we hope to avoid. You see it coming. If it's coming from below you downstream, you generally have time to make a good decision. And we also will be communicating as much as we can via text message when we know the approximate location of towboat traffic. We will be able to say in a text message, there's a towboat upstream of mile 200, for example. His plan is to pull over at mile 280 tonight. And so you'll have that information, but it's not perfect. And so you need to be alert and aware. That means that you are, if you're using headphones or a speaker on your boat, it is down low enough that you can hear a towboat's engines. You can hear a towboat if he uses his horn to signal. That's important. At night, you are paying attention to lights and any kind of spotlight, searchlight activity that a towboat might be using. And you're certainly paying attention if they have pulled over, which they most likely do at night, that you are aware that that could be parked right alongside the channel side of the river, and you need to be looking and aware that something could be right there in your way. Got some more photos of how to interact with the towboats as well. So as Christina and Steve talked about buoys and wing dikes, here's a good visual of what that looks like. And you can also see there's a ton of room. I mean, there's room for these guys pass each other on the river going upstream and downstream, so they can certainly handle passing some canoes and stand-up paddleboards. You can see how much room there is. If you've got a discerning eye, you can see where the channel is, right? You can see the outside bend. That is where the towboat is going. You can see that a canoe or kayak, having realized that there's a towboat coming, could easily move outside the channel to the wing dike side. And this towboat's going downstream, so you'd be going downstream as well. So you can see the water trailing off these dikes. You can travel right along that edge of those dikes and still make good time if you'd like, knowing that, wow, if I don't like his waves or I feel uncomfortable, I can just plop right in here, have a safe place. There's a beach, there's shade sometimes. I can wait for these waves to go by And that's what a lot of people choose to do, especially at night. If a towboat was passing you at night and you felt like you couldn't really tell the size and dimensions of that boat, you could certainly just pull off in the wing dikes and be fine.
So one other thing that I'm going to mention is this year, because of the Infrastructure Act that was passed a couple of years ago, there is an absolute ton of rock work going on the river right now. So what that means is that we have generally a towboat with 1 or 2 barges that are going to a quarry or a loading site alongside the river. They're loading up with rock. They usually have like a track hoe or a backhoe or some really huge equipment to move that rock. And then they're going to be going to wing dikes or revetments or trail dikes alongside the river and placing that rock. So there right now, I believe there's 10 and possibly even more different towboats that are doing rock work along the Missouri River. We'll be talking to all of those companies as the race approaches. They'll all be aware of the race, exactly when it's happening, how it's going to proceed during the week. But you know, they're going to be trying to get their work done during the day while the race is going on. So you know, it's highly possible that you will encounter more towboats or barges, you know, this year than ever before. And although most of those are not going to be moving freight through the whole race course, they're going to be, you know, moving 10, 15, 20 miles back and forth from work sites to loading areas.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about fog and how that relates to towboat traffic. This is a great photo just because in this photo you can see that the pilot house is above the low-lying fog, and anything in that fog cloud down low would be completely invisible to the pilot of that boat. And he may still be driving that boat because he has radar that would pick up anything metallic in the water. He can see the tree line. He has a chart plotter that shows him the river and his spot in the river. And so he's not thinking about kayaks or canoes being in his way. Everything on his screen says go, go, go. So again, we're just trying to reiterate to you, you should not be moving your boat in fog. That is a very bad decision because of no matter what electronics you're carrying along with you, unless you somehow have radar on your stand-up paddleboard, there's really, you're blind. You're not proceeding in a safe manner. Here's another example. This is Jameson Island there. Beautiful place to pull over and stop if you're tired during the race. Probably about mile 217 or something like that, 215. But this is a towboat with his barge load going downstream. And you can see how narrow it can be for you in a stretch like this where there's a sandbar, huge sandbar accreted. There's not a ton of room in this situation. And so you would definitely want to, you know, get out of the way, and you definitely want to be aware that his visibility or her visibility may not be enough to see you in the water with that fog if you're traveling through that fog. But you can also see how there's habitat for you to find egress out of the way, out of the channel. You can kind of see in the water there that sandbar continues underwater. You can see the ripples. You can see a buoy there in the water marking that. So, you know, a lot of people hate buoys. I generally am not thrilled, but you know, the good thing about a buoy line is if you see a towboat and you see a buoy line, you immediately know where that towboat's going to be, and you immediately know where it's not going to be. And you can be inside the buoy line or outside the buoy line. It doesn't matter to you. So buoys can actually help you very much in these situations. But we just wanted to share this photo because there can be tight quarters and fog does not help.
I'm going to actually go back a couple slides here again, and I do just want to reiterate what Scott was saying. I'm the person who is most likely to be talking to all of these towboat pilots, and the thing I hear over and over again during this race is that paddlers will often sort of pass barges or approach barges like too close to the barge for the barge pilot to be comfortable. They have very limited vision with all these barges stacked in front of them. So, I just want to say one more time, it may seem like, oh, I'm just going to scoot around this barge. I'll just go right around the edge of it and I'm out of their way. I know I'm fine. But meanwhile, you have a pilot in that pilot house who can't see you, and they're freaking out because they don't know where you went. They knew there was a boat there. It's gone now. They can't see it. So, just one more time, because it's not just you they're passing. In a race like this, they're passing person after person after person. So if we can all really give them plenty of space, try to be visible for them, really get out of their way, like that's going to make everybody feel better at the end of the day. And I'm actually going to add one more thing too about fog. I've spent, many mornings on this race on boat ramps trying to convince people not to paddle into thick fog. And there's always other people there who've done it before and can share like their nightmare stories about how they would never do that again. So just to kind of like back up what Scott was saying, once you get out there, it gets highly, highly disorienting to even find where shore is. And so some people will try to track near shore and say, well, I'll keep in sight of shore. But then all of a sudden there's a parked barge on the side and maybe it's 3 deep. And you don't really have enough reaction time to deal with that. So, that's an issue for folks. And I've even been, as a safety boat pulled over onto a sandbar, letting the fog burn out. And we've seen, a light coming upstream at us, maybe for like a half an hour or so. And we finally realized that it's actually, one of our racers is paddling upstream thinking that they're going downstream. They got turned around in the fog and they didn't even realize that they were actually paddling against the current. That kind of stuff, I've heard many stories like that. That happens all the time. And most people that have paddled in this thick river fog regret it and won't do it again. So just go ahead and listen to those folks.